The worst part wasn't saying it. The worst part was that I meant it, and she knew I meant it. And we both just stood there in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room that smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet. The projector was still running behind us, quarterly numbers still glowing on the screen, like nothing personal had just happened, and neither of us said another word for what felt like a very long time. Her name was Kaori Voss-Kimura. She was my boss. She had been my boss for 2 years, 1 month and 11 days, which I knew not because I was counting, because I wasn't, but because HR had sent me an automated work anniversary email last week with a balloon emoji that somehow made everything feel worse. I'm going to tell you how we got there. To that conference room. To that sentence. To the silence after it that rearranged everything. My name is Obafemi Adisa, but people call me Femi. I'm 31. I grew up in Ibadan, then southeast London, then in the part of Baltimore that people who didn't grow up there describe as up and coming, with an enthusiasm that reveals how recently they arrived. I have a degree in data analytics from Morgan State, finished while working weekends at a FedEx distribution center. I mention that because it matters in rooms where other people's paths to the same chair were cleaner. I worked at Pratt & Vale Analytics, a mid-sized marketing analytics firm in a glass building on Pratt Street with exposed brick on 2 interior walls. Not real, we kept the brick because it's historic exposed brick. The kind that gets added during renovation to make people feel like they're working somewhere, creative rather than somewhere corporate, a distinction the building itself had not been consulted about. Pratt & Vale had about 90 employees, clients mostly healthcare and financial services. The work was genuinely interesting if you liked finding patterns inside numbers, which I did. Some people like puzzles and crosswords. I like the puzzle where a campaign underperforms in the Mid-Atlantic in Q3 and the answer is something nobody thought to look for. I was a senior data analyst. I was good at it. Good in the specific way. That makes you the person people drag into a meeting when the numbers don't make sense and the client presentation is in 3 hours. That is a useful kind of good. It is not always a visible kind. The people who explain insights in front of clients are visible. The people who produce insights are sometimes confused for the furniture. Kaori Voss-Kimura was never confused for the furniture by anyone. She came in as director of analytics 2 years ago, transferred from a firm in Chicago that I'd heard of but never worked with. A reputation preceded her in the specific way reputations precede women who have earned them. In rooms that didn't initially want them there, she was 36. Japanese and German. Close-cropped hair. Posture that made you stand up straighter. Without her saying anything about your posture, thin-framed glasses. And she spoke slightly slower than expected, which created this effect where everybody leaned in to hear her, and by the time she finished her point, the room had already agreed without noticing when the decision happened. I noticed all of this from a professional distance. I want to be clear about the professional distance because it matters. I was not naive enough to mistake proximity for permission. She was my boss. She controlled my performance reviews, my assignments, my trajectory. There is a power structure in that arrangement that does not dissolve because you find someone interesting. I knew that. I have always known that. What I didn't account for was that she would start finding me interesting too. It began the way these things often begin, not with a dramatic moment. With small accumulations, you don't add up until the sum is already larger than you prepared for. She started requesting me specifically for client presentations, not by telling me directly. She'd tell Marcus and Project coordination she needed. Femi on Hollenbeck or Praxis Healthcare. Marcus would forward the note. I would show up. Kaori would brief me on what the client needed. I would build the analysis that made the case. We were good at it together in the way complementary things are good together. Her understanding of the room. My understanding of the numbers. 2 halves of the same machine. After the Praxis presentation, the one where the CFO pushed back hard on our retention, modeling, Kaori looked at me across the table and I walked through the methodology live without notes and the CFO said, "Okay, I'm convinced." Afterward, Kaori caught me in the hallway and said, "That was excellent." Not good job. Not nice work. Excellent. The word you use when someone exceeded your expectation, not merely met your requirement. I said thank you. I kept walking. I took the stairs. That became the pattern. I would deliver something clean, something precise. She would acknowledge it directly, without performance. And I would accept it and keep moving. There is a discipline in that. A discipline in not letting a compliment from someone You cannot afford to misinterpret become something it shouldn't. I practiced that discipline. What I was less prepared for is that she practiced something too. She started staying late. Not conspicuously. Her door stayed open. That was her default, a real open door policy. I'd be at my desk. She'd be in her office. And the building would settle into that after-hours quiet, where every keyboard click sounds louder than it should. We didn't engineer it. We were simply the kind of people who stayed until the thing was done, rather than until the clock said to leave. One evening in November, maybe 6 months after she started, Kaori appeared at the edge of my desk with 2 coffees from the place downstairs that closed at 7. It was 7:40, which meant she'd bought them before 7 and kept them for 40 minutes. They were slightly cold, and somehow that made it more rather than less. She set one down beside my keyboard without asking and said, "The Dunfield numbers aren't adding up. Can I show you?" We worked another 90 minutes. She sat in the chair beside my desk rather than standing over me. That is a choice people make. At one point, she disagreed with my interpretation of cohort data. She said so plainly. With specifics, I looked again. She was right. I told her she was right. She said, "Thank you for not being weird about it." I asked what she meant. She said, "Some people need a moment when they're wrong. You just move." "The data moves," I said. "I follow." She looked at me with an expression I didn't try to interpret. Then she looked back at the screen. I would like to tell you I went home and thought about it all night. I didn't. I went home. I made jollof rice using leftover tomato base. My mother sent frozen in a container with my cousin Dio. I watched 40 minutes of something on my laptop. I fell asleep. I was careful in those early months about what I let myself think. I had a boss. She was exceptional at her job. The work was good. Those were the parameters. I stayed inside them. What I could not entirely control was what happened in my face. That's the thing nobody tells you about feelings. You are actively trying not to have. You can govern your behavior. You can govern your words. You can make all the right professional choices. But your face has a more autonomous relationship with the truth. And if someone is paying attention, Kaori was constitutionally incapable of not paying attention. They will see things you have not decided to show. I knew she was starting to see something because I started being careful about looking at her directly. This is the most honest thing I will say in this story. I started avoiding her eyes not because I was ashamed of anything, but because I didn't trust what she would find there. And because I didn't think it was fair to put something in her field of vision that complicated her professional life when she had done nothing to invite it. So I looked at screens, documents, whiteboards, specific data points, the window, the table. I did not look at her face for longer than the natural duration of a conversational exchange. Because beyond that duration, I didn't know what I would do. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was a woman who could spot an inflection, point in a quarterly trend at 40,000 feet. She was not going to miss the fact that the person she spent the most professional hours with had developed a disciplined habit of not quite meeting her eyes. She didn't say anything for 2 months. I know it was 2 months because I was tracking it privately, the way you track days of something difficult to remind yourself you can do it. Then came the Tuesday in February, quarterly review day, break in the meeting. Everyone else went to the break room. Kaori stayed. I stayed too because I was pulling a revised visualization on my laptop. She was checking something on her phone. Then she wasn't. She was looking at me. I was looking at my laptop. And she said very quietly, "Why won't you look at me?" The room went still. Projector hum. Numbers glowing. My throat tightened, then loosened. I looked up. I met her eyes. I held them. And I said with a clarity that came from 2 months of compression and not a single word of planning, "Because when I do, I forget you're my boss." Kaori didn't move, didn't look away, said nothing for a long time. And then she said something I didn't expect. She didn't say that's inappropriate. She didn't say, "We need to keep this professional." She said, "How long has that been true?" I thought about the cold coffee, the hallway after praxis, the way she watched me think. The way she listened like listening was a decision, not a reflex. "A while," I said. Kaori's voice was even. "For me too," she said. Then the team came back from the break room. We both turned toward our screens like nothing had happened. The meeting resumed. We delivered the quarterly review, 90 minutes of charts and conclusions. without looking at each other directly once, which is, I think, the most professional thing either of us ever did. Let me stop here for a second, because this is where people usually try to make it cute. This is where they want the story to become confession, spark, immediate romance. That's not how it worked, and honestly, that would have been the cheap version of us. The real version had a problem, a serious one, because mutual feelings don't erase power dynamics. Mutual feelings don't rewrite HR policy. Mutual feelings don't protect anyone if it turns messy. And if you've ever been the person who had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously, you don't gamble with messy. Not at work. Not with someone else's career hanging in the air. So what happened next wasn't fireworks. It was logistics. It was ethics. It was two people deciding whether honesty was going to be a virtue or a weapon. 6 more weeks passed. Same building. Same projects. Same org chart with both our names on it. And this constant quiet pressure in the background. Now that the truth has been spoken, it cannot be unsaid. Kaori came to my desk one evening in March, same as November. Same cold coffee energy. Except this time she sat down and said, "We need to talk about what happens next." I closed my laptop. "Okay," I said. "There are things I won't do," she said. "I won't create a situation where your work is evaluated by someone who has a personal interest in you. That's not fair to you, and it's not how I operate. So if this becomes something, your reporting structure has to change." She paused, then added, "Not negotiable from my side." "I wasn't negotiating," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you the terms so you know what you're considering." I looked at her directly on purpose this time. A choice rather than a slip. "What would the reporting change look like?" "You'd move to Darius Kowalczyk's team," she said. "West Coast accounts?" "It's a lateral move on paper. The portfolio is bigger. The client exposure is better." "You've thought about this," I said. "I think about things," she replied, dry enough to almost make me smile. "What if I say I want to stay on your team," I said, "and we table everything else?" Kaori held my gaze. "Is that what you want?" And I felt the question hit the part of me that doesn't lie. Because if I stayed, I would still be living inside a glass box with the truth pressed against the walls. I'd still be trying not to look at her. I'd still be asking my face to behave like a stranger to my own feelings. And I didn't want that. "No," I said. Kaori nodded once, slow. "Okay." The transfer was processed in April, framed as a strategic reassignment. Which, to be fair, it was. Darius Kowalczyk had been at Pratt & Vale 11 years. A broad, straightforward man from Krakow who ran his team like a good restaurant, efficiently, no ego, making sure everyone had what they needed. He welcomed me in a meeting that lasted 7 minutes and ended with, "Your reputation is that you're thorough and you don't panic. Those are my 2 requirements. You'll be fine." He didn't ask why I'd transferred. Either he didn't know or he had decided it wasn't his information. Either way, I appreciated the clean entry. For 6 weeks after the transfer, Kaori and I didn't see each other professionally. The building was big enough for that. We passed in the lobby sometimes, near the coffee station. We spoke the way colleagues speak, briefly, warmly, nothing that would alarm anyone who happened to look. If anyone was watching, they would have seen 2 professionals who respected each other. And nothing else. Our first actual non-work conversation happened on a Saturday in May, at the farmer's market on Saratoga Street. I went there every other week for sweet potatoes from a farm in Harford, county that were better than anything at any grocery store. Kaori was there with a canvas bag and a focused expression, examining heirloom tomatoes like they were a data set. She looked up and saw me and something in her face. Did the thing I'd been watching it try not to do for 2 years. It settled. Like a question mark becoming a period? "Sweet potatoes," she said, nodding at what I held. "Tomatoes," I said, nodding at hers. We walked the market together. She had opinions about stone fruit that were extensive and well-supported. I told her about my mother sending frozen tomato base with my cousin like it was contraband. Kaori laughed. A real laugh. Not the professional courtesy version. And I thought quietly, there's the person behind the posture. We got coffee and sat on the steps of the old library building. Saturday moving around us. People carrying flowers, bread, bags. Kaori told me about growing up between Stuttgart and Osaka, between a German father, his engineering precision, and a Japanese mother's disciplined restraint. How she'd grown up as a synthesis of 2 cultures that both prized competence over display. How she'd spent most of her professional life being described as intimidating by people who meant she was good at things and didn't apologize for it. Was that what I did? I asked. Found you intimidating? Kaori glanced sideways. You're one of 6 people in 10 years who disagreed with me in a meeting and then thanked me when you were wrong, she said. So no, I don't think that's what you did. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was flattering, because it was accurate, because she saw specifics, not impressions. Here's another pause, because this is where people think, now it's easy. It wasn't. There was no external villain, no scandal, no cheating, no melodrama. The complication was simpler than that and harder. 2 people who had only known each other inside a professional frame, trying to understand who the other one was when the frame fell away. That is not glamorous work. That is slow work. And slow work scares people who are used to being competent, because competence is easier when there are rules. Outside the office, the rules are softer. You have to negotiate them in real time. You have to admit uncertainty, and uncertainty is a kind of vulnerability, especially for people who built their lives around being unbreakable. Kaori was more private than I expected. Not cold, not withholding. Just genuinely careful with the interior rooms. She had been in one long relationship in her late 20s. She described it in 3 sentences. None blaming, all precise. A thing that made sense on paper. Kind on both sides. Not enough. We discovered that on a Tuesday. We've both been fine since. She had an older brother in Stuttgart who called on Sundays. She spoke to him in German. Sometimes I'd hear her laugh differently, more expansive, less assembled. The Stuttgart version of her. I met that version first through a doorway, listening. Then slowly in person. She met my mother in July, earlier than I intended. Because my mother is a force of geological patience, who simply settles into your life until she has gathered the information she requires. I made jollof rice in my apartment. Kaori arrived with a small bag of fruit like she'd researched what was polite. My mother asked her questions about Stuttgart and Osaka, like she was collecting data of her own. Kaori answered with that careful honesty she had. After Kaori left, my mother sat at my kitchen table and said in Yoruba, "She sees you?" I asked what she meant. My mother said, like, some people look at you and they see the summary. She looks at you and she sees what's underneath. That's my mother's gift. Naming the thing you've been circling. What the conference room sentence didn't fully capture is this. It wasn't only attraction. It was also, and this is harder to say, my own habitual sense of limits. I had spent years being the invisible one. The one behind the screen. The one producing the insights while someone else presented them. And even when I got promoted, part of me still behaved like I wasn't supposed to take up too much space. Kaori looked at me and did not see a ceiling. She saw exactly what was there. Someone capable of more than his current square footage suggested. And she said it not with grand speeches, but with specific, targeted honesty, merciless in the best way. The kind you can't mistake for flattery. Third pause. Practical one. If you've ever had a workplace situation like this, feelings crossing a line, the org chart doesn't allow, here's what actually keeps people safe. Clear structure changes, reporting line, assignments, evaluation. Documentation through appropriate channels, time, real time. Not secret time. Protecting the junior person's career like it matters more than the romance. Kaori did all of that, not because she was trying to be noble, because she understood systems, and because she wasn't going to build something beautiful on a foundation that could collapse. That's what made me trust her. Not the feelings, the behavior. It was when I look at you, my brain stops protecting me the way it's trained to. That's what made it scary. That's what made it honest. The director role started in February. Philadelphia in February is a specific kind of cold that has opinions about you. I moved into an apartment in Fishtown with good light and bad insulation and a kitchen, large enough to cook in properly. Kaori stayed in Baltimore. We did not pretend that was simple. We also did not panic, because both of us are people who learned that some problems don't get solved by dramatic decisions. They get solved by consistency, by showing up, by being honest even when it's inconvenient. Kaori visited in March, Friday evening to Sunday afternoon. Saturday, we spent most of the day in the Italian market. She approached it with the same heirloom tomato focus she brings to every market, comparing fruit like she was building a case. That night, I made jollof rice using a new frozen tomato. Base my mother had sent, again, because My mother is consistent in logistics, if nothing else. Kaori ate 2 bowls and said, "This is the best thing I've had in months." I told my mother. My mother said, "I know. I don't have a clean conclusion for you because this isn't a completed story. It's a current one, which is the best kind to have. The kind you are still inside of. Still making decisions in, still finding the shape of. What I know is this. There is a version of me that stays behind the screen. That keeps his face arranged. That builds careful sight lines around the thing he cannot afford to misread. That version of me is cautious and competent and safe. I was that version for a long time. And then a woman asked me a direct question in a quiet room. And I gave a direct answer because she was someone who had always answered mine. Sometimes the sentence that changes everything is not planned. It arrives the way true things arrive. From the part of you that got there, before your judgment did. The projector hummed. The numbers were on the screen. The room smelled like dry erase markers and old carpet. I looked at her. And I forgot. Just briefly, just completely. Just irreversibly that she was my boss. I haven't forgotten it since.